the scale of the problems and things like that. So we wanted to break it down and try and work out how could we add something that was going to create action, create positivity, create energy towards actually solving some of these problems.
December 2025 arrived quietly at Buckingham Palace, wrapped in thick winter fog that clung to the old stone walls like a memory refusing to fade. Inside the palace, staff members moved carefully through long corridors, carrying clipboards and folders, performing what should have been a normal yearly task. Every year, the palace completed a full inventory of its archives, a process meant to protect history by counting, checking, and resealing thousands of documents collected over centuries. Most of these files were boring, filled with schedules, letters, and records no one outside the palace would ever care about. But this year, something was different. Very different. During the process, a file appeared where it should not have been. It had no catalog number, no date, no label, and no record of ever being stored there. The file was wrapped in thick brown paper, tied tightly with old string, and hidden among documents that had already been logged years earlier. A palace worker noticed it immediately because it broke every rule of the system. This was not a mistake. This file did not belong. The worker, nervous and unsure, passed it up the chain of command until it reached Prince William, who had personally ordered the inventory as part of his responsibility as future king. When William received the file, he felt an immediate sense of danger. He did not know why, but experience had taught him that secrets hidden without records were never harmless. He took the file to his private office, locked the door, closed the curtains, and opened it alone. Inside was a single photograph, one image. That was all it took. The photo showed 3 men standing together at night on a quiet road. One was Prince Andrew, one was Jeffrey Epstein, and the third looked unmistakably like Prince Harry. The lighting was poor, but the face was clear enough to cause instant fear. William's heart began to pound. Epstein's name alone carried enormous weight, pain, and scandal. The image suggested secrecy, something hidden, something wrong. William sat down slowly, staring at the photo, understanding immediately what it could do. If this image ever became public, it would not just damage Harry. It would destroy the monarchy itself. Andrew's past had already brought shame to the family. Adding Harry to that story would create a storm the palace might never recover from. William did not rush. He did not shout. He did not call the press or confront his brother. Instead, he chose silence. Silence was how the royal family survived crises. Silence was protection. But silence also carried risk. William ordered the file locked away and told only a handful of trusted professionals to begin a quiet investigation. Meanwhile, far away in California, Prince Harry felt a strange sense of unease he could not explain. He had worked hard to build a new life, away from royal duty, focusing on family, charity, and personal healing. But when word reached him through a private channel that a photograph existed linking him to Epstein, fears struck like lightning. Harry knew he had never met Epstein, not once. Yet he also knew the power of images. In the modern world, truth mattered less than perception. One photograph could undo years of effort. It could destroy his reputation, his work, and his family's future. Fear turned into anger. Anger turned into desperation. Harry felt once again like the palace was moving in silence around him, making decisions without his voice. Memories of past conflicts returned. He believed, deeply, that the institution always protected itself first. That belief pushed him toward action. Instead of waiting, instead of trusting that the truth would come out, Harry decided to protect himself. He booked a secret trip back to England, telling almost no one. In his mind, time was the enemy. If the photo leaked before he acted, it would be too late. The stage was set for a chain of decisions that would change everything, not because of lies alone, but because fear makes people act before understanding has time to grow. Back in England, Prince William worked quietly but carefully. He did not trust emotions, he trusted facts. He contacted experts in image analysis, people who had spent years studying photographs for governments and courts. These experts did not care about royal titles or family drama. They cared about pixels, shadows, angles, and light. They studied the photograph closely, zooming in to levels invisible to the human eye. At the same time, William ordered a deeper review of where the file came from. The inventory showed that it had been mixed in with items recovered from Royal Lodge, the former residence of Prince Andrew. That detail stayed in William's mind like a warning bell. As days passed, the experts reported strange details. The lighting on Harry's face did not fully match the environment. The shadows near his collar were slightly off. The image was convincing, but not perfect. This suggested digital manipulation. Meanwhile, Harry, acting on fear rather than patience, hired a private investigator to secretly confirm what the palace was hiding. His plan was simple in his mind: get proof, control the story, protect himself. During a large palace event, when security systems were stretched thin by guests and movement, the investigator entered an office area and photographed the file. The investigator was later caught, not because of luck, but because palace security systems noticed an unusual access pattern. When questioned, the investigator confessed he was hired by Harry. This moment shook William deeply. Until then, he believed Harry was innocent and simply scared, but the break-in made William doubt his brother's judgment. Still, he did not stop the investigation. He did not punish Harry publicly. He kept moving forward. Days later, the image experts delivered their full report. The photograph had been altered. Harry's face had been taken from an unrelated public photo and carefully placed into the original image. The manipulation was advanced, but not flawless. William felt relief wash over him. Harry was innocent. But relief quickly turned into anger when the final piece of the puzzle appeared. The original photo showed only Andrew and Epstein. Someone had deliberately framed Harry. Financial records, recovered quietly, pointed to a technician known for manipulating photos for tabloids years earlier. Payments traced back to accounts connected to Prince Andrew. The motive became clear. Andrew, isolated and disgraced, believed the family had abandoned him. In his anger, he wanted revenge. By dragging Harry into the scandal, Andrew hoped to spread the damage and force the family to suffer as he had suffered. He hid the altered photo among old files, knowing it would eventually be found. William confronted Andrew privately. Faced with evidence, Andrew admitted his role, not with shame, but with bitterness. He felt wronged. He felt sacrificed. Meanwhile, Harry continued his own investigation in America, unaware that William had already uncovered the truth. Harry's investigators found the original photographer, who confirmed that Harry had never been present. Harry now had proof. But instead of sharing it quietly with William, old wounds guided his next choice. Harry believed the palace would still protect Andrew. Acting from years of resentment, he decided to go public. He gave a televised interview, holding up the original photo, accusing the palace of silence and cover-up. The story exploded across global media. Headlines spread faster than facts. Public opinion divided instantly. Harry felt justified, believing he had finally taken control of his story. But in doing so, he crossed a line that could not easily be undone. The interview hit Buckingham Palace like an earthquake. William watched it in silence, each accusation cutting deeper than the last. He had stayed silent to protect Harry, and now that silence was being used against him. For the first time, William felt something break inside. He had acted with patience, discipline, and loyalty, only to be accused of betrayal. The palace responded quickly, not with emotion, but with evidence. A formal statement was released explaining that the photo had been manipulated, and that a full investigation had been underway from the beginning. Andrew's involvement was quietly confirmed, and he was placed into complete isolation. But the damage was already done. Public trust had been shaken. More importantly, the bond between two brothers had been torn apart. Harry was summoned back to England for a private meeting. When he arrived, he expected confrontation. What he found instead was disappointment. William laid out every step of the investigation, every decision made to protect him. Harry realized, too late, that the truth had been on his side all along. He had simply refused to wait for it. His public accusation, driven by fear and old pain, had turned truth into a weapon. Harry apologized. He sent messages. He asked for forgiveness. But some wounds are not healed by words alone. William returned to his duties, carrying the weight of both duty and loss. He had protected the truth, but lost his brother's trust in the process. Harry returned to America, facing a different kind of silence now, one he had created himself. The story ended not with victory, but with tragedy. Not because of lies alone, but because fear, when mixed with mistrust, pushes people to act before understanding can catch up. The photograph was exposed as fake, but the damage it caused was very real. Two brothers, once united by loss, were now separated by choices. The palace survived, as institutions often do, but the family paid a price that no statement could undo. And that is where the story leaves us, not with answers, but with questions. Should patience always come before action? Or is action sometimes the only response to a lifetime of feeling unheard? The truth came out in the end, but the cost of reaching it may have been far greater than anyone expected. After the palace released its official statement and the media storm slowly began to shift, the noise did not disappear. It only changed shape. The loud accusations were replaced by endless discussions, debates, and quiet judgments. News channels replayed the interview again and again, this time side by side with the palace's evidence. Experts argued over timelines, public trust, and responsibility. Some people felt sympathy for Harry, believing his actions came from years of pain and mistrust. Others believed he had gone too far, choosing publicity over family. William watched none of it after the first few days. He focused on his work, his children, and his responsibilities. But inside, the damage was real. Silence followed him everywhere. He had spent months protecting his brother, absorbing pressure without defending himself, believing that truth needed time to be strong enough to stand on its own. Yet when the truth finally arrived, it did not repair what had broken. William replayed the moments again and again in his mind. The unopened messages, the missed phone calls, the choices that could have been different if even one conversation had happened sooner. He wondered whether silence, once a shield, had become a wall. At night, when the palace grew quiet, William sat alone in his office, staring at the desk where the file had once rested. The photograph was gone now, locked away as evidence, stripped of its power. But the feeling it created remained. He did not feel anger as much as exhaustion, a deep tiredness that came from holding everything together while something precious slipped through his fingers. Kate noticed the change. She saw how William listened more than he spoke, how his smiles came later than usual. She reminded him gently that doing the right thing does not always bring peace. Sometimes it only prevents worse damage. William understood that truth, but it did not ease the loss. Meanwhile, Harry returned to America under heavy attention. He believed the truth would free him. Instead, it left him facing something more difficult than accusations: responsibility. His interview, once praised by supporters, now looked rushed and incomplete. Commentators pointed out that the palace evidence matched what Harry himself had discovered. The public began asking harder questions. Why had he not waited? Why had he not spoken privately first? Harry tried to explain, but explanations sounded weak when compared to consequences. At home, the atmosphere was tense. Meghan supported him, but even she understood the damage could not be undone easily. Harry struggled with regret, not because he had defended himself, but because he had chosen to assume the worst about his brother. The belief that the institution would always sacrifice him had guided his actions more than the facts in front of him. He realized that fear had shaped his choices more than truth. Late at night, Harry reread William's messages, now unanswered. Messages he had ignored while preparing his interview. Messages that had not accused, but simply asked for time. The realization came slowly and painfully. He had acted to protect himself, but in doing so, he had hurt the one person who had never stopped protecting him quietly. Both brothers now lived in different worlds, separated not by distance, but by trust that had cracked under pressure. And while the public slowly moved on to the next story, the silence between William and Harry grew heavier with each passing day. Time passed, as it always does, and with it came distance. Andrew faded further into isolation, no longer a subject of sympathy or defense, but a reminder of how bitterness can twist into destruction when left unchecked. His attempt at revenge had failed, yet its consequences remained. The photograph that once threatened to destroy everything now sat as proof of how fragile truth can be when mixed with manipulation. For the palace, procedures were tightened, archives secured, and lessons quietly learned. Institutions survived by adapting, and the monarchy did what it always had. It adjusted, it endured. But families do not heal as easily as institutions. William carried forward, steady in public, careful in speech, focused on the future. He did not speak about Harry, not in anger, not in defense. Silence, once again, became his choice. But this time, it was not strategy, it was grief. He had lost a brother who was still alive. Harry, on the other side of the world, continued his work. His speeches now more measured, his words chosen with greater care. The confidence he once felt was replaced by caution. He had learned that speaking first does not always mean being heard correctly. He wondered often if forgiveness would ever come, or if some moments permanently redraw the shape of relationships. The world continued to argue about who was right and who was wrong, but the truth was more complex than headlines. William was right to protect the truth patiently. Harry was not wrong to fear being sacrificed again. Both were shaped by loss, pressure, and a lifetime lived under observation. The tragedy was not that one acted and the other waited. The tragedy was that they did not act together. In the end, the Epstein photograph became a footnote, another scandal exposed and archived. But the real story was never the image itself. It was what fear does to trust, what silence does to understanding, and how old wounds influence new decisions. The story leaves no clear heroes, only people shaped by their pasts, making choices under unbearable pressure. And perhaps that is the most honest ending. Truth does not always arrive in time to save what matters most. Sometimes it arrives only to show what has already been lost. And so the question remains, not just for William and Harry, but for anyone watching. Is patience always the wiser path? Or does waiting sometimes feel like abandonment? When trust has been damaged for years, is forgiveness possible, or does survival demand distance? The palace walls still stand, strong and unmoved. But behind them, like in any family, the hardest battles were never about power or reputation. They were about understanding, trust, and the painful cost of acting alone. As months turned into a full year, The sharp edge of the scandal slowly dulled in the public mind. But inside the people involved, its effects continued to shape daily life in quiet, lasting ways. For the world, the Epstein photograph became just another chapter in a long list of royal controversies, discussed occasionally and then replaced by newer headlines. For William, however, it marked a turning point in how he understood leadership, family, and silence. He became more careful, not just with information, but with people. He learned that protecting someone without telling them can feel, to that person, like abandonment. This realization did not make him regret his actions, but it made him question his methods. He began encouraging clearer communication inside the palace. Even when conversations were uncomfortable, advisors noticed a shift. William still valued discipline and patience, but he also allowed space for explanation, for reassurance, for saying, "I am handling this, and I have not forgotten you." These were small changes, invisible to the public, but meaningful behind closed doors. He spent more time with his children, understanding now how easily trust can fracture, and how important it is to build it early and honestly. Occasionally, Harry crossed his thoughts, not with anger, but with sadness. William wondered whether time would soften what words could not fix. He did not block Harry's messages, but he did not answer them either. Some wounds, he believed, needed silence to scar over before they could heal. For Harry, life continued outwardly as before. But inwardly, something had shifted. The confidence he once had in speaking boldly was replaced with reflection. He became more cautious, more deliberate, aware that truth delivered without patience can sound like accusation. In private moments, Harry admitted to himself that he had acted too fast, driven by old fears that had not fully healed. Therapy sessions became deeper, harder, forcing him to confront the pattern of expecting betrayal before it happened. He realized that his story, the one where he was always sacrificed by the system, had become a lens through which he saw every silence, every delay. That lens had protected him once, but now it had distorted his judgment. Harry did not stop speaking publicly, but his tone changed. He spoke more about healing, about mistakes, about the cost of acting alone. Some supporters noticed and appreciated the shift. Others drifted away, preferring the firebrand version of him. Harry accepted that not all support is meant to last. He sent one final message to William, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging harm without defense. He did not expect a reply. He simply needed to send it. Andrew remained mostly unseen, living in quiet isolation, his name rarely spoken aloud within the palace. His attempt at revenge had not restored his dignity or rewritten his story. It had only confirmed it. Those who studied the case later would note how resentment, when mixed with isolation, can grow into something destructive. Andrew became a cautionary example, not just of scandal, but of what happens when bitterness replaces accountability. The palace quietly revised its security, its archival systems, and its internal crisis responses. Mistakes were acknowledged internally, even if never admitted publicly. That was how institutions survived, by learning without confessing everything. Yet the most meaningful changes were personal, not procedural. The photograph, once feared as a weapon, now rested forgotten in secure storage, stripped of its power. It no longer mattered as an image. What mattered was what it revealed about fear, trust, and communication. In the end, there was no dramatic reunion, no public forgiveness, no final speech that repaired everything. Life moved forward in smaller, quieter ways. William continued preparing for a future crown, shaped by lessons learned through pain. Harry continued building a life defined less by reaction and more by intention. They were still brothers, bound by blood and shared history, but separated by a moment when trust failed to arrive in time. Perhaps one day, time would soften that distance, or perhaps it would simply teach them how to live with it. Some stories do not end with closure, they end with understanding. And sometimes, understanding comes too late to save what once was, but just in time to prevent the same mistakes from being repeated again.